All right, guys, welcome. I know this is the last talk of the day, so let's. I'll try not to keep you guys too long. So my name is Sujee Maniyam. I am a developer advocate for Nevius. So like most of us here, I do a lot of coding, and more I've been using coding agents. Before I get to the story, just want to say if you want to get in touch with me, email, Twitter works perfectly well. So I always start these talks with like a little bit of a humor, like an icebreaker, if you will. I asked LLM, tell me a joke about coding agents, and it came up with this. I thought that was pretty decent, right? So state of things, yeah. Because the reason I start with this is coding agents have become so powerful. They can do a lot, but also they can kind of run away with some ideas. So this talk is about kind of, how do you actually plug in coding agents with the open models, and also some best practices. And I love to hear from the audience as well on some of the techniques you guys use. So maybe a quick show of hands. I want to see if anybody's using any agents like Cursor, Claude Code. Yep, lots of hands going up. Can you guys yell out your one? Which one are you using? Cursor? Claude Code? Okay, DeepSeek. Cool. Oh, interesting. Okay, good. I haven't tried that. Okay, yeah. So on my list of things to do. Perfect. This is great. So and I love to hear your experience from you as well. So please, we'll have a few minutes at the end to talk about that. So this is probably the most important slide. You want to maybe take a picture of this. This gives you credit to the Nevius platform where you can run open models, and also a bunch of links. The one on the left-hand side is a QR code. You can scan that or type in the bit.ly link. It'll take you to a very simple form. Just punch in your name and email. You do have to enter a valid email because the code will be emailed to you guys. So just be mindful. And then once you have that, I'll show you how to apply this. Go to Token Factory. It's basically a managed API service, managed inference service using APIs. And then also, if you have any issues, Discord link right there. So I'll leave this up for a few seconds, maybe take a picture, and then any issues with the code, something doesn't work, you can always tag us on Discord, or you can reach out to me as well. So very simple agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about open models, coding agents, and how to mash them together. That's it. So very quickly, and I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the service, but very quickly, we believe good inference starts with good models, but also you need like good infrastructure behind it to make it happen. So if you look at a lot of our, and I've done this personally, like we'll start with like some close models, start prototyping, do some prompt engineering, get it working, and then once you start scaling, then either the cost goes up, and I have no idea, like it's like a black box. And I even have no idea what's happened to my data. So the Token Factory, the idea is we host open source models. We optimize the models for inference. And since the models are open source, you know what exactly you are running. We provide the infrastructure so you can focus on building the app. Right? That's what we do. Just on the other side, on the right-hand side, we have customers who migrate from proprietary models, come to us. They will customize an open model to fit their needs, which will run just as good or even better with a much reduced cost. And also another thing I like to highlight is we manage infrastructure, so you never have to think about spinning up GPUs and any of that. Yep, so people say, oh, that's great, but how good are the open source models? And I like to show you this. There's a little benchmark result. This is from artificial analysis. And what that does is it kind of shows you, they run a bunch of benchmarks and give each model like a score. So it's like one number, so it's easy to kind of digest, because there are a lot of benchmarks around. And if you look at this, on the left-hand side all the way down, the black ones are proprietary models. And they dominate the leaderboard. No surprise there, right? Because these labs spend a lot of money developing in R&D and developing the models. But what's surprising, you see the blue ones. Those are the open models. You can see they are pretty interleaved, and they are very competitive. So they're not like all the way far back, right? You can see they are even sometimes better than proprietary models. So the gap between open models and the proprietary model is like very narrow, and it's narrowing every single, pretty much every single week. So what does it mean? It means it's good news for us consumers because we don't have to chase a proprietary model to have a intelligent model. We can sort of use an open model just as good and probably cheaper, and also gives you more choice, right? So a few things. So people say, okay, yeah, if its model's open, why don't I run it? I can just download it, and I may have a GPU or data center. I'll just run it. Sure. However, running these large models takes quite a bit of engineering. Pretty soon, you are kind of managing GPUs. You are figuring out, okay, how do I handle failure? How do I run these large models on multiple GPUs and all that? So there's a lot of optimizations we have done behind the scene. So when you use an API, you get all this for free. For example, just to highlight a couple of things, we do very aggressive caching to speed up inference, and also things like we do like something called spec decoding. What it means is when a request comes in, we first ask a smaller model to produce an answer, because smaller models can produce answer very quickly, and a larger model will verify the answer. So instead of the larger model taking long time to produce the answer, it kind of quickly verifies the answer smaller model produces. It's kind of like imagine you are a senior programmer developer, you're asking a junior developer to write some code, and then they go and write the code, and then you verify, right? So speeds up things quite a bit. So anyway, all these optimizations we have done behind the scene, and one more thing I want to highlight is what I call zero data retention. And this is kind of important because, in summary, we don't capture your data, we don't save your data, we do not use your data to train our next model, right? And this is important these days because we are all building agents like OpenClaw, like personal agents. So you could be sending a lot of sensitive data, your emails, your text messages, whatever, right, to a model. So we want to make sure you are comfortable. Yes, your data is none of our business, right? So we don't save your data, we don't do anything with the data. So zero data retention by default. So all right. So one thing I've sort of seen this. So that's a little bit about open models, hosting open models in a Nebius token factory. And the credit code I've shown you earlier is going to basically give you some credit, so you can actually get started on the platform, right? So yes, try out a few models, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. So the way I've sort of seen this, especially coding agent evolve is like, remember we all, when you start typing, it'll complete like the same line. That was great. But now you see on the bottom, you can actually give it like a full task. And this is something I just did. I said, look at this code base, this is a website, and make sure it's mobile friendly, right? And it'll kind of, it'll start analyzing everything, CSS templates, and JavaScript and everything, and say, yep, this is what we need to change to make it more mobile friendly. So what I've seen is a shift from just doing like a line-by-line completion to basically doing a significant amount of work doing tasks. And the way they sort of evolve is like autocomplete to now coding agent, right? So, and this is how they run on a very basic high level. You give them a task saying, okay, make sure the website is mobile friendly. They'll kind of they say, okay, I'm going to start analyzing files. Maybe I should start investigating like HTML layouts, CSS. So they will plan out. They will maybe write some code to say, okay, how do I change this to be mobile friendly? Maybe they'll run some tests, and if the tests pass, great. Otherwise, they will throw repeat. Right? So that's kind of the loop a lot of the agents go in. And here are some popular coding agents. This is not a full list, but sort of the most popular ones. I'm sure I'm missing a few here. The top ones are not open. The ones on the bottom are open. I'm kind of curious, is anybody using any open coding agents? Like OpenCode, PyDev? OpenCode, yeah. So one more hand over there. What was it? Yeah. Oh yeah, Client. So I sort of bounce between Client and Cloud Code, kind of back and forth. So that's my current stack at the moment. So what makes a good coding model? So a model has to basically kind of do this well to be considered as a good coding model. It needs to have long context because we are sending like large amount of data to say, hey, here, look at this code base, and maybe do some refactor, right? Or rewrite this code, things like this. So long context definitely helps. Must support tool calling. Should follow instructions carefully. Minimal hallucination, the whole bit, right? So there are a lot of benchmarks here. I'll show you a few, but what really matters is your experience. Like how does it work for you, for your workload? Here are some of the proprietary models on the left and open models to the right. And a lot of the time when you use like Cloud Code or like a cursor, they will probably end up using the closed models. And today's talk, I'm going to show you how to basically use the open models with your coding agent that you're already familiar with. So one of the common misconceptions, and I see this, and I kind of fell into this trap myself, is we like to chase the latest models. Like, oh, next week something drops, and the week after there's something else. And what I then realized is the coding performance is not exactly to model performance. Sure, model plays a role, but when we do coding at the bottom, what I see is like it's the entire harness, right? Your agents, the coding agent, model, even the settings play a big role in the quality of the code. So there's no point in just chasing the latest models. I mean, it's nice to sort of, test them out and try them out, but model alone is not the deciding factor. So for example, you can see the model does a lot of work behind the scene, but the agent harness does a lot of work also. Like it figures out, okay, what file should I read? What file should I send, right? Is the results good? Should I call the tool? All the work is done on the harness. So it's a complete stack that's going to determine your final output. So like I said, there are a lot of benchmarks around, right? Sui bench, live code bench, there are a lot of these. I sort of started looking at more and more the artificial analysis one. The reason is they sort of run a bunch of benchmarks, one of these benchmarks, and again, they give like a one number. So it's kind of easier to kind of digest and say, yep, this is a number, so it's like a score. So I'm going to show you a few of these from the artificial analysis. So this is on the performance side. And another thing I want to point out here, and this is very interesting, is see, they don't just list models. What are they listing? They're listing model plus agent, because that really matters a lot. Because which model you pair with which agent is going to determine the final outcome. And you can see all the way to the left, Cloud Code with Opus, right? And then kind of down the line, look at the blue one here, Cloud Code with GLM 5.1, right? That's an open one. And then Kimi K26. So your agent plus model is always a combination, not just a model, right? Very important. So this is the performance, right? So this is the index, right? They run a bunch of benchmarks and assign a single number. Let me show you another one, which is very interesting. This is the cost. See how it's going to almost flipped, right? So you can see the large models, the Codex models, kind of expensive. Look at the blue ones, right? Blue ones are very affordable and very cheap. Like look at the Kimi 2.6, DeepSeek Pro. So this is part of the equation. You say, yeah, these models are great, right? They are the top of the line. They do the absolute best, but especially with tokens, now the token price is starting to matter, because when you do agents end up using a lot of tokens, right? More than humans. Like somebody said 10x or 20x. Not like 10%, 20%, like 10x, right? So if I'm using 100 tokens for a task, an agent might use like 100 tokens, right? So tokenomics starting to matter. So the price of token does matter. And you can see, right? Open source models tend to be pretty competitive on that front. Cool. So if you look at this chart, you can sort of say the proprietary models are like, kind of leading the pack. No surprise there. But open models are very close behind and just as capable, right? So there's no reason for us to either use one or the other, or even mix and match. I'll show you how to do that. Cool. So why open models, right? This is a pretty straightforward, cost, one factor, transparency, you know what the model you are using, how it's built. And also it gives you vendor neutrality, right? You can actually pretty much take to run these models in any vendor. So you're not locked into one vendor running their proprietary model. So it gives you a lot of freedom to move around a bit. And I know somebody who actually does host their own model because they were in a highly sensitive environment. They cannot use any API services. So they actually have a data center in the office, which they host open models, and that's what they use for coding. So open models do give you that freedom as well. Some of the models that are popular, I will talk about this. So my favorite one right now is Kimi K2. But everything here is like a very capable open models. And I'm going to show you some numbers. I mean, let's not get too bogged down on these numbers. These are the models we actually host on Token Factory, and I kind of organize them from the largest to smallest. DeepSeek, you can see like 1.6 trillion, right? That's a massive, massive model. Also, you can see some pricing, right? And also look at the context window, and then the SWE Sui bench is kind of the de facto coding benchmark. And you can see they are pretty capable, right? And also, like you can sort of see here, like Kimi 2.6, right? On the pricing side, they are pretty much neck to neck, and they are very good at the kind of coding benchmarks. So yeah, right? So yeah, so these are very, very capable model. And like I said, my favorite is right now I'm using 2.6. It's been working really well. But I'll show you. It's very easy to swap models in and out, and you can try them out and see which one works for your task. Because maybe one will work best for like web programming, and another one will work for more like Python programming. So you try them out. Yeah? All right, cool. So what does it take? So now we sort of covered the models, agents, and we looked at some of the numbers. How do we pair them together? Right? So I have a coding agent. Let's say I'm using Cloud Code or Cursor. How do I make it work with open models? So the path of the very straightforward path is if the agent supports an OpenAI compatible API, it's very straightforward. We can just plug it in, right, and it's done. There's no other setup required. It's very easy to do. So the way you would do this, and again, so right, if you haven't taken a picture of this, maybe now's a good time. So you would need an API key, right? So get your credit done, get your account set up, get an API key. Then I'm going to show you how to set this up. I'll try to show you a couple of live demos. Fingers crossed they work. We'll find out soon enough. So let me start with Client. So this is the one I sort of started using early on because Client actually works from within VS Code, and that's my editor. So I kind of naturally started using Client, and it was reasonably well. And they claim this is one of their top downloaded plugin, and all that. And it's a pretty easy to use coding agent. And the way to do this, and I'll show you a screenshot. So you can sort of see here, right? Go to settings, and I'm choosing OpenAI compatible provider. And then all I'm running is like I'm plugging in our Token Factory API URL, API key, and then choosing the model. That's it. And if you choose, you can sort of customize the context window and the pricing as well. So they'll give you some stats. But that's it. In like one screen, I configured Client to use open models. So let me show you guys here. So here's my client. Right here, go to settings. Right, you see this, very straightforward. And I'm using Kimi 2.6. And right now, I have a let's do a quick test. So I have like let me copy this thing here. So I'm going to just ask a simple prompt. I have a repo open. I'm going to say, hey, look at this repo. Kind of, let's say I'm starting on this repo new. Just I'm like, give me a summary. Like, tell me what it does. Where to look for things. And if I want to start contributing, give me some ideas to contribute, right? So let me just copy this prompt. And here's my task, and you can see it, right? I'm in the client window. Paste, let go, right? And then hopefully, right? So you can start seeing, right? It's kind of reading the repo, looking at the file, sending it to the model, doing the whole thing. And as it's doing this, it'll kind of also give you like token pricing and sort of see, right, how much context are they using and all that. That's it. Pretty good, right? So just on a single screen, we configured Client to use NVS model. Yeah. And it'll come back and say, oh, these are the tasks I'm recommending, all that. Pretty cool. Next one, Cursor. So I'm sure I saw a couple of hands go up to Cursor. I sort of dabbled on Cursor. This is not my day-to-day IDE, but it's a very capable IDE. So again, Cursor, same idea, right? You basically configure the model with the API key. Let me show you here. Do we have this running? There we go. Yeah. So yeah, so Cursor, same repo open. Right? I go to the models. I punch in my OpenAI API key because we are OpenAI compatible. You just punch in the key, punch in the URL, and I said, what? Use 2.6. That's it. So let me basically ask the same question, right? I said, right? I'm in repo. I'll look at the repo and give me some pointers. Right? Same thing, right? So it'll so agent is doing the work, talking to the token factory models in the back end, giving you the answer. So very, very easy to get going. Cool. My current, so these days I spend a lot of time with Cloud Code because I naturally I sort of like the terminal side of things, and I started using it. And then, so Cloud Code, as I saw a lot of you using it too. Very capable agent, very popular. By default, they use Opus, Anthropic models, right? Opus, right? Sonnet and all that. But the architecture allows you to actually plug into a proxy. So the way you will do this is like you set up a proxy, and when the request goes in, the proxy will intercept the request, and then from there it'll route it to any compatible provider. So the idea is like you run a proxy, and then requests are then forwarded to, say, Token Factory to run the models and give the answer back. So the Cloud Code just acts, thinks like it's talking to just a regular API path, but inside it's talking to a proxy. Very simple to set up. So what we have is we have actually proxy, and code is there. And if you do a search for Cloud proxy, you'll find, and maybe a Token Factory Cloud proxy, you'll find it. It's very simple to set up. You get the repo. Basically, we have to configure the end file. Only thing honestly I have to put in here is the API key, right? So once you have an API key, and you can see here, I am using Kimi26 for all models. Here you have a choice, because Cloud actually will switch automatically from like big, medium, small models depending on the task complexity. So here I'm just using one model, but you can actually specify a bunch of different models, so the Cloud can intelligently switch between the models if you choose to. So that's perfect. And once I'm done with this, I just start the proxy, and then I'll start Cloud. So let me just show you this real quick, what it looks like. So here's my proxy. All right, that's it. Just UV run. I already have my end set up. And then you can see it's loading my API key, right? It's URL, and it's basically using these models. There you go, right? Set up. And another cool thing it does, the proxy, it actually also publishes some numbers. So you can sort of see. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize. I'm sorry, numbers. Yeah. So let me show you. So go back to the terminal. So my proxy is running. So by the way, so my proxy is running right here. Just UV start. And then I'm going to start Cloud code. But so I have like a little alias, because when we start the Cloud with the proxy, you had to specify where to contact the proxy is, right? So that's that. So I have like a little alias. I say Cloud proxy. Yeah. So. And then what it's going to do, it's going to basically come up and connect to the proxy. You can sort of see at the bottom here, right? It's actually showing the model it's connected to. So that's great. So same question, you can ask. Actually, yeah, let me show you the thing. Okay, I say, look at the repo. Tell me some of the issues I can start contributing, right? And it'll start kind of working through. And you sort of see the request kind of going through, right? Getting the proxies, the request going through. And also here, if you look at the observability, you can see, right? So the numbers are kind of going up. So that's it. So that's how easy it is to actually configure, right? Should be done by now? Yeah, there you go, right? So it's going to say here, these are the top potential tasks you can actually do. It'll say, this is easy, this is medium, this is hard, right? It'll give you like a little thing. So perfect, yeah? So that's how easy it is to pair open models with IDEs. Like I showed you Klein, Cursor, and Cloud Code. This is what I spend most of my time on, working on. So cool deal. So now you've seen this, like a kind of end-to-end. How do you do this? And I want to do like a little bit of discussion, Q&A as well, and I want to hear from you. One thing I always say is, it's not a choice of proprietary versus open, right? So you kind of have to think about more like, instead of choosing one model, kind of think like more like, which stage of my pipeline can I use this model? So your task might end up using multiple models based on the complexity of the task, right? So for example, here, when the agent starts out, it may start planning the work. So for this, it may actually use a premium model. The premium model could be like a proprietary model or a high-end open model. That's pretty heavy, right? But it's good at planning. And then you're actually implementing. Let's say you're writing like say unit tests, or you're writing the implementation testing. This you can do like a sort of a mid-tier model, because they know how to do this. And then finally, to do like a code review, maybe use a premium model again. So you're kind of mixing and matching. So you're not you're not like choosing it by hand. Your agent will do this for you when they do the work, because they know the complexity of each task, and they say, okay, now for this I'm going to use a mid-tier model, for this I'm going to use a large model, because right. So all that. So yeah. So always think about along those lines. So kind of like just think about this is like this. So on the top I've shown like pretty straightforward task, like a mid-tier, lower-tier model can do, and then towards the end, like for example, you have like a very difficult bug to track down, so probably you want to use a premium model, yeah. Or maybe you want to do some architecture diagram review, so use like a hefty model that knows how to do it. Costs more, takes longer to run, but it's worth it, yeah. So, and another thing, and this is this is just sort of common sense, but sometimes even I'm also like tend to be a little lazy and then say fix this repo or something like this. So with the agents, it pays to be as specific as possible. So you can say instead of saying scan the repo and make it better, right? So just right, give it very specific instructions, and they do really help, because otherwise I've seen models kind of go and kind of do their own thing. This is something I highly recommend. Instead of just jumping straight into code, I kind of ask them to say, do some research, find the cause. So like let's say I'm debugging something, tell me what needs fixing, and then give me your plan, right? Then I'll approve it, then you can do it. It's amazing how well this works, because I'm not a front-end web designer, but I was just designing a simple like vibe coding a simple web page. And I said, okay, I gave the task saying make all the buttons green, right? So I kind of went and did, I said, don't do any code changes. Just tell me what you're going to do. It came back and said, here's my plan. So it's actually modifying the HTML files in place, like they're like about 20 files or something. It's actually modifying them in place to change the color to green. Even though I'm not a front-end designer, even I knew like you should probably do like a CSS instead of HTML. So I said, shouldn't you want to do it in like one place using CSS and then use it all over? And then it goes, oh yeah, great idea, and then goes do it, right? So even models sometimes they will just do it, but not the sort of the quote unquote the right way, right? So definitely makes sense to actually review them anyway. So anyway, and then let's say you're creating a patch again. These are kind of useful again. Right? You all have your own methodology, but this is something I use. I'll say do this, right? I'll say something like don't refactor the whole code base, just do minimal changes, modify the 2 or 3 files that really need to change, and then it'll kind of follow it. So I'd love to hear from you as well. I know a lot of you are using this, and I'd love to hear from you as well, like your observations, war stories, good practices that you have done from your own. So feel free to raise your hand, and I think we have a mic floating around, and I'd love to hear from you as well. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Anyone? Sorry, was there a hand up there? Okay. By the way, anyone here using PyDev? Somebody just mentioned this, and then say, yeah, it's like a very minimal coding agent. So it's on my list of things to try. So I'm kind of curious, anybody actually has experience using PyDev? Yeah. Any other stories? Any other observations, or even questions we can do on the sort of the coding agent side? Yeah, I think there's a hand, please. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the demonstration. I'm just curious, so in order to use your harness, must I use your API key, or can I use API key from another model host?
You can, yeah. So so the question was, API key, how do you plug it in? As long as the harness, the agents harness support OpenAI compatible, because that's pretty much the de facto standard, you can pretty much plug in anyone who supports the standard. So it could be us, it could be like say OpenRouter. Yeah, so a lot of providers support OpenAI compatible API, and that's it. So you need to do 2 things: plug in the API key, and also point them to the URL. Right, that's it. And then from that point on, it's pretty straightforward.
Okay, yeah. May I continue? One more question?
Sure, please.
So I've been using Codex, and I enjoy ability to customize its behavior, and I like slash commands. So what customization opportunities you've got on your harness?
Oh, sorry, you mean how to optimize the workflow more like?
For instance, yes, so like simple as agents MD, do you have opportunity to customize model behavior, create tools, anything like that? Right.
So kind of paraphrase a little bit, like sort of more like controlling agent behavior. I've been using more and more like skills or like instructions, like if you do a search, you can People have published there. Here's my cloud.md file, right? That you can just drop into a project and it'll have instructions that you can do. That'll be a good place to start. And eventually, another thing we do as a company is we have a repo of a bunch of skills that we develop for our own code base, and that's shared, right? So if you're a new developer, that's the first thing you'll start with. You'll clone the skills repo and make it part of your cloud or whatever coding engine you're using. And then from that point on, you can have all the sort of best practices already kind of baked in, and then you can. So you don't have to like start from scratch. So I wouldn't recommend writing a cloud.md from scratch. People actually use Claude to write cloud.md. You can try that. Oh, there are like a lot of these really good examples out in the open. So you can just start with that. So that's be a pretty straightforward place to start with. And then obviously like this is a starting point. And then as you kind of work through, you might start adding, right, and then tweaking to the way. So this is probably the most obvious way you can start with. Yeah. Sure thing. Good. Thank you. One more question, please. Yeah.
Hi. Claude Code is the only one of these things that I've used, and I was wondering if you do this proxy thing and plug it in. At the moment, I would use /usage and /context and things to understand how what my usage is and how the context is filling up. How does all that work when you're shoving it through a proxy?
So so great question. So like in new sessions, new contexts, especially with this one, is a bit of a work in progress. It can recognize new sessions, like when you clear the session and start a new session, it can reset the stats. The person who's maintaining this proxy, he's one of our engineers. So this is kind of a bit of a work in progress, but it will work through it. There are hooks you can plug in. So when the Claude wants to display like a stat or something else, it'll actually, instead of just doing it on its own, it'll kind of run your tool that'll in turn query the proxy and then give the right answer. So there are these little hooks provided that you fill in that makes Claude to talk more seamlessly with the proxy. On a very basic level, just to kind of just to finish the thought, on a very basic level, sometimes the stats you see may not be all that great, all that accurate, because it's kind of guessing, right? But there are hooks. As you implement those hooks, then the proxy will actually give you accurate answers. How much tokens, for example, how many requests you use for this particular session, how much tokens and all that stuff.
So I guess context is the thing that I worry about a lot, because I never want it to auto-compress. I have that turned off and I manage it by hand. But I need to know as it's filling up so that I can manage that process. And I have this whole dance I do where I get it to write out a summary and capture the session and all that. But I guess I don't understand what does Claude, or Claude Code, I guess, what does it understand about the token usage when it's not its tokens?
No, because Claude actually has a pretty accurate count of tokens, because that's the one kind of figuring out the sessions and right, right, and so Claude will know how much token it's been using. So the way you would configure this is to tell Claude, this is the token window for this particular model. So for example, it will, like when it approaches like say 80% or 90%, it will start compacting the history, right? So kind of the way you input your because Claude doesn't know, it's using a model, it has no idea, it has some idea of the model, but it may not know the exact context window. So once you provide that, it'll kind of work off that. And then you can say, once you approach like 85%, start compacting very aggressively. So it'll do it for you. So the Claude will do it for you. You just have to give it a little extra information for it to do it. So hopefully, and happy to talk afterwards if you have more questions.
But presumably Claude can't compact another model's context window, can it?
No, because Claude is the one actually providing the actual context, right? So so you can actually compact the context or history based on the task you are using. Because sometimes, like I've done this too. Like I'll do one task, and then I'll just keep continuing for like another task. I forgot to do like a new or a clear. So it's I'm sort of continuing, right? So, but these days the context windows are so big, right? So you're very unlikely to run out of them. But you will if you have like really large code bases. So what I found again, with the proxy, is it's reasonably okay. It handles reasonably well. So So we'll talk more. Yeah. Any other questions, comments? Good, guys. Very good. So let me show this one more time, and then we will. All right, final slide. Thank you for being here. So credit code, bunch of links. If you have any questions, contact at the bottom. I'll be here for the next few minutes, so please come and if you have any questions, comments, love to network and connect. So thank you so much.